What if the most powerful truth about your mind was written down 3,000 years ago and then deliberately buried? A forbidden manuscript, hidden from the world for centuries, contains a single idea so dangerous that entire empires tried to erase it forever. Today we are uncovering that idea, and it will change the way you see your own mind, your choices, and the reality around you. If this is the kind of truth you have been searching for, subscribe and stay with us until the very end. Somewhere in the ancient world, long before the rise of the civilizations we study in school today, a group of scholars gathered in complete secrecy. They were not soldiers. They were not kings. They were not priests seeking to expand the reach of any particular doctrine. They were thinkers, observers, and seekers of the deepest and most uncompromising kind. And after decades of careful study, they had arrived at a conclusion so radical, so fundamentally threatening to every structure of power that existed around them, that they made a decision that would echo through the next 3,000 years of human history. They chose to encode their most dangerous findings into a single manuscript and conceal it from the world. That manuscript was not a religious text designed to guide the faithful toward salvation. It was not a political document intended to reshape the boundaries of an empire. It was not a collection of myths or legends passed down through generations of storytelling. It was something far more dangerous than any of those things. It was a precise, detailed, and carefully constructed map of the human mind. A map that described with extraordinary clarity exactly how human consciousness operates, exactly how it generates the reality that surrounds it, and exactly what becomes possible when a human being learns to use that consciousness with full deliberate awareness. And it was written at a time when absolutely no one in a position of institutional power was supposed to know that such a map even existed. For thousands of years, the dominant institutions of human civilization, whether religious, political, philosophical, or scientific, have operated on a single foundational assumption. That assumption, rarely stated openly but embedded deeply into the structure of every major system of social organization humanity has ever produced, is this: the average human being is not fundamentally capable of governing their own inner world. The mind is too unpredictable, the emotions are too volatile, the desires are too dangerous, and therefore the mind must be shaped, directed, channeled, and ultimately controlled by some authority that exists outside of the individual. This assumption was not an accident. It was not the product of genuine philosophical inquiry or honest observation. It was constructed with extraordinary care and maintained with extraordinary force. Because the people who built and sustained those systems of power understood something that they were determined to keep from the general population. They understood that the assumption was false. What the forbidden manuscript proposed was a theory of the human mind that shattered this foundational assumption so completely that no institution depending on external control could survive contact with it. According to this ancient framework, consciousness is not something that the physical body produces. It is not a chemical reaction happening inside the brain. It is not a biological accident that emerged from millions of years of evolutionary pressure in a universe that is fundamentally made of dead matter. Consciousness, according to the theory preserved in this manuscript, is the primary substance of existence itself. It is not something the universe produces. It is something the universe is made of. The physical world, with all its apparent solidity and permanence, is not the foundation of reality. It is the surface expression of a deeper reality that is fundamentally mental in nature. And the human mind is not a passive receiver of a fixed external world. It is an active generator of the world it experiences. Every thought you think, every belief you hold, every emotional conviction you carry in the deepest layers of your inner life is not merely a reaction to the circumstances you find yourself in. It is an active creative force. It is broadcasting a signal into the fabric of a reality that is, at its most fundamental level, responsive to consciousness. And that signal is continuously shaping, attracting, and materializing the circumstances, relationships, events, and conditions that constitute your lived experience of the world. This idea did not arrive in the ancient world by accident or by the sudden inspiration of a single brilliant mind. The scholars who recorded this manuscript had spent decades, in some cases entire lifetimes, engaged in a systematic and disciplined study of the relationship between the inner world of a human being and the outer circumstances of that human being's life. What they observed, documented with painstaking care and subjected to the most rigorous examination they were capable of, was a pattern so consistent, so reliable, and so thoroughly reproducible across different individuals, different cultures, and different historical circumstances that they could no longer classify it as coincidence. They could no longer explain it away as the product of random chance or the mysterious workings of divine favor. What they were observing was a law, not a law invented by human beings and imposed on the world from outside, a law that was woven into the very structure of existence itself. The law operated as follows. When a human being held a thought with enough emotional intensity, with enough sustained and deliberate focus, with enough inner conviction that the thing being imagined was not merely possible but real, the external circumstances of that person's life began to reorganize themselves around that thought. Not metaphorically, not in some vague and poetic sense that requires a great deal of interpretive generosity to appreciate. Physically, materially, in ways that were observable, documentable, and repeatable. People who were suffering from conditions that should have been permanent experienced sudden and inexplicable recovery. People who had spent years struggling against circumstances that seemed completely fixed and immovable watched those circumstances dissolve and reform into something entirely different. People who held a clear and emotionally vivid inner picture of a reality they desired began encountering, with a frequency that defied statistical explanation, the exact people, opportunities, and conditions that made that desired reality possible. The implications of this observation were so enormous, so far-reaching, and so fundamentally disruptive to everything that the major institutions of civilization were built upon, that the scholars who made it understood immediately why it had been suppressed. If the mind truly shapes material reality, then the concept of free will take on an entirely different meaning than the one most people have been given. In most philosophical and religious traditions, free will is understood in relatively modest terms. It is the ability to choose between two or more available options that already exist. You can go left or you can go right. You can say yes or you can say no. You can obey or you can disobey. The freedom being described is essentially navigational. You are moving through a landscape that was created without your participation, and free will is your ability to choose your route through that pre-existing landscape. But what the forbidden manuscript described was something categorically different from navigational freedom. It described what we might call generative freedom. The freedom not merely to choose between options that already exist, but to generate entirely new options that did not previously exist anywhere in the observable world, through nothing more than the sustained and deliberate direction of conscious thought. This is not the freedom to navigate reality. This is the freedom to author it. And the difference between those two kinds of freedom is not a matter of degree. It is a difference in kind so fundamental that a person who truly grasps it is no longer the same kind of being as they were before the understanding arrived. Here is where the theory becomes deeply and unavoidably personal, because if this framework is accurate, if the mind genuinely functions as the generating force of the reality it inhabits, then every limitation you currently experience in your life is not what it appears to be. It is not an external obstacle placed in your path by the indifference of the universe, the cruelty of other people, or the arbitrary distribution of fate. Every limitation is, at its foundation, a belief. A thought held so consistently, for so long, with such deep emotional certainty, that it has crystallized into what appears to be an unchangeable physical fact. The financial struggle that feels permanent and inevitable. The health condition that seems to have a life of its own entirely independent of your wishes. The relationship patterns that keep reproducing themselves no matter how many times you resolve to do things differently. The quiet and persistent sense of being fundamentally unworthy of something greater something better, something more aligned with what you sense in your deepest moments of honesty you were actually meant to experience. According to this ancient theory, none of these things are facts about the world. They are facts about the frequency at which your consciousness is currently operating. They are the outer manifestation of an inner pattern that has been running, largely unexamined and largely unchanged, for years or in many cases for decades. They are not evidence of what is possible for you. They are evidence of what you have been up until this moment, believing about what is possible for you. And that is an entirely different thing. The manuscript goes further than simply identifying this relationship between inner belief and outer circumstance. It goes much further than asserting that consciousness shapes reality and leaving the reader to work out the implications on their own. It describes the mechanism through which this process operates with a level of precision and detail that feels, to the modern reader, remarkably sophisticated for its time. It speaks of two distinct layers of mind, two fundamentally different modes of consciousness operating simultaneously within every human being, and it is the relationship between these two layers that determines whether a person's attempts to change their reality will succeed or fail. The first layer is what the manuscript calls the surface mind. This is the layer of consciousness that most people, when they think about their mind at all, assume is their entire mind. It is the part that processes language. It is the part that engages with logic and reason. It is the part that evaluates evidence, constructs arguments, makes plans, and narrates the ongoing story of your life to yourself and to others. It is conscious, accessible, and to a significant degree controllable. When you decide to think about something, this is the layer you are directing. When you read these words, this is the layer that is decoding them. But beneath the surface mind, operating continuously and almost entirely beyond the reach of ordinary waking awareness, is what the ancient scholars called the deep mind. The deep mind does not think in words. It does not engage with logic or respond to reasoned argument. It does not care about evidence or plans or the narratives you construct about yourself and your life. It thinks in patterns. It thinks in frequencies. It thinks in the language of emotion and the language of deeply felt, bodily experienced, visceral impressions of what is true, what is safe, what is possible, and what you fundamentally deserve. And it is the deep mind, not the surface mind, that determines the magnetic quality of your consciousness. It is the deep mind that is broadcasting the signal into the responsive fabric of reality. It is the deep mind that is generating the world you actually experience, as opposed to the world you tell yourself you want to experience. This distinction is the key that unlocks everything else in the manuscript, because what it means, in practical terms, is that the surface mind and the deep mind are not always in agreement. In fact, for the vast majority of people living within a civilization built on the systematic suppression of inner sovereignty, they are almost never in agreement. The surface mind may be entirely sincere in its desire for change. It may spend hours every day focused on positive intentions, constructing visions of a better future, repeating affirmations designed to reprogram its dominant patterns. And all of that effort may produce absolutely nothing, not because the underlying theory is wrong, but because none of those surface-level activities are actually reaching the deep mind. The deep mind is running older programming. It is operating on beliefs that were installed long before the surface mind was sophisticated enough to evaluate them critically. Beliefs about safety and danger, beliefs about worthiness and unworthiness, beliefs about what people like you, in circumstances like yours, are and are not allowed to have. The surface mind can affirm abundance all day long, while the deep mind is saturated with the emotional memory of scarcity. The surface mind can declare health and vitality, while the deep mind is operating on an inherited conviction that the body is fragile and that suffering is inevitable. The surface mind can intellectually embrace the idea of loving relationships, while the deep mind is running a pattern, installed in early childhood, that says intimacy is dangerous and people will eventually leave. In every one of these cases, the deep mind wins. It always wins. Not because it